A cold wind moved across the empty road while the evening sun slowly faded behind the hills. On the dusty ground sat a small girl beside her weak mother, gripping her hand as if letting go would take her away forever. Her stomach ached with hunger, yet she stayed strong because her mother could barely move. Travelers passed by, glancing for a moment before turning away, leaving the child's quiet hope to fade with the dying light. The girl looked down the lonely road again and again, praying that someone might stop, but every minute felt heavier than the last. Her mother's breathing grew slower, and fear began to fill the little girl's heart. Just when the silence felt unbearable, a distant sound broke through the wind. Slow, steady horse hooves echoed along the road. The girl lifted her head, her tired eyes searching the horizon, wondering if this approaching stranger would change their fate or disappear like everyone else. The cowboy was known across the quiet valley as a man of few words who lived alone on a distant ranch surrounded by endless fields. Most people believed he preferred silence over company, and he rarely stopped when passing travelers on the road. His life followed the same routine every day, caring for his horses and working until the sun disappeared behind the hills. That evening he was returning from the nearby town, riding slowly along the dusty road while the cool wind moved through the empty land. The world around him looked peaceful, but something unusual suddenly caught his attention. Far ahead on the side of the road, two fragile figures were sitting in the dirt without moving. At first he thought they were simply resting travelers, yet something about the stillness felt wrong. His horse slowed as he looked closer. A small girl was sitting beside a weak woman, holding her tightly, as if she was afraid the world might take her away. As he guided his horse closer, the fading light revealed details that made his chest tighten with concern. The woman sitting on the ground looked pale and exhausted, her body leaning weakly against a small rock as if it was the only thing keeping her from collapsing. Dust covered her worn clothes, and her breathing sounded shallow, like someone who had been fighting to stay awake for far too long. Beside her, the little girl held her mother's arm tightly with both hands, her thin fingers refusing to release their grip even for a moment. Her face showed fear, but there was also a quiet determination in her eyes, the kind that appears when a child is forced to grow strong too soon. When the horse stopped a few steps away, the girl immediately shifted her body slightly forward, placing herself between the stranger and her mother as if she could protect her despite her fragile size. The cowboy noticed how small she was, yet how firmly she tried to stand her ground. He slowly climbed down from the saddle, careful not to make any sudden movement that could frighten her more. As his boots touched the dusty road, the girl watched him closely, her tired eyes searching his face for any sign of danger. The woman tried to lift her head when she heard him step closer, but the effort seemed too heavy for her weak body. Her voice barely formed a whisper before fading into silence again. The cowboy knelt a short distance away, studying the situation without rushing. The girl's cheeks were hollow, and her lips looked dry from thirst. Her clothes hung loosely on her thin shoulders, revealing how little strength she had left. The truth became clear in a single painful moment. They had not simply stopped to rest on the road. They had been left with nothing, struggling against hunger for days without help. He could see it in the way the girl's hands trembled slightly while holding her mother, and in the slow breathing of the woman who looked as though even sitting upright required every ounce of energy she had. The evening wind passed quietly around them, carrying dust across the road while the empty land stretched in every direction. No wagon wheels approached, no travelers appeared, and the lonely silence made the scene even heavier. The cowboy felt a deep weight settle in his chest as he realized how close they were to losing their strength completely. The girl continued watching him with guarded caution, refusing to step away from her mother, yet the exhaustion in her eyes revealed that she had been waiting for someone, anyone, to notice them before it was too late. In that quiet moment, the cowboy understood that fate had placed him on this road for a reason, and what he would do next might decide whether the fragile hope still living inside that little girl would survive the coming night. The cowboy remained still for a moment, sensing how fragile the moment had become. Then he slowly reached toward the saddlebag hanging beside his horse and pulled out a small metal flask filled with water. He held it carefully in his open hand so the girl could see there was nothing threatening about his movement. Her eyes followed every motion with deep caution, and her body stayed close to her mother, as if she was ready to defend her with the little strength she had left. The wind carried dust across the road while silence stretched between them, heavy and uncertain. Without stepping too close, the cowboy gently placed the flask on the ground within the girl's reach and moved his hand away to show he meant no harm. For a second she did not move at all, studying his face, searching for any sign that this stranger might deceive her the way the world already had. Her mother tried to lift her head again, but weakness forced it back down, and a faint sound escaped her lips, barely strong enough to form words. The girl looked down at the water and then back at the cowboy, her mind caught between fear and desperate need. Hunger had already drained her energy, but thirst was becoming unbearable. Finally, her small hand slowly reached forward, trembling slightly as she picked up the flask. She held it carefully to her mother's lips first, helping her take a few small sips before allowing herself to drink. The cowboy watched quietly, saying nothing, understanding that trust could not be demanded, it had to grow on its own. The girl lowered the flask once more and wiped her mouth with the back of her sleeve, yet her eyes remained fixed on him with guarded uncertainty. She still did not know why he had stopped when everyone else had passed by without caring. The fading sunlight painted long shadows across the road while the evening air grew colder. The cowboy noticed how the girl's shoulders shivered slightly, and he realized the night would become dangerous for them if they remained there much longer. The mother attempted to speak again, forcing a few weak breaths that struggled to become a sentence, but exhaustion quickly stole the strength from her voice. The girl gently held her hand, whispering something soft meant to comfort her, even though fear still lived behind her tired eyes. The cowboy felt the tension surrounding them like a quiet storm waiting to break. Every second that passed forced a silent decision. If he rode away, the empty road would swallow them before morning arrived. If he stayed, he would be stepping into lives that had already suffered more than they deserved. The girl lifted her gaze once again, staring at him with a mixture of hope and doubt, silently waiting to see whether this stranger would turn his horse and disappear like the rest of the world, or choose a path that could change all three of their lives forever. The cowboy stood quietly while the little girl's uncertain gaze searched his face. And after a long silent moment, he made a decision that would change the direction of that lonely road forever. Instead of stepping back toward his saddle to leave, he moved closer with slow and careful steps so he would not frighten her. The girl tensed at first, her small body ready to react, but the calm expression in his eyes carried no threat, only quiet concern. He crouched beside them and gently placed one steady hand beneath the girl's arm, helping her rise from the dusty ground. She was lighter than he expected, a clear sign of how long hunger had followed them. Without speaking harshly or rushing the moment, he lifted her carefully and seated her on the horse's saddle, making sure she held the front firmly. The girl looked down at him with surprise, her tired eyes wide as if she could hardly believe someone had finally chosen to help them instead of walking away. Then the cowboy turned his attention to the mother who still struggled to remain upright. He offered his arm and patiently supported her weight while she slowly gathered the strength to stand. Her legs trembled beneath her, yet the presence of someone willing to help gave her just enough courage to try. The wind moved softly through the open land while the last light of evening painted the sky in fading gold. The girl held the saddle with both hands and watched everything carefully, still unsure if this moment was real or simply a fragile dream that might vanish. When the mother managed to stand beside the horse, the cowboy steadied her gently, making sure she would not fall again. The exhaustion on her face told a painful story, yet there was also a faint spark of relief that had not existed before. For the first time since the long road had left them stranded, someone had chosen kindness instead of indifference. The cowboy placed the water flask back in his saddlebag and adjusted the reins before looking up at the little girl once more. Her frightened expression had softened slightly, but doubt still lingered in the corners of her eyes. She had learned too early that promises from strangers often disappeared with the wind. Sensing that unspoken fear, the cowboy rested one hand lightly on the horse's neck and spoke in a quiet voice meant only for her to hear. His tone carried calm strength rather than empty comfort as he looked directly at the child and whispered, "From now on, you're not alone." The words were simple, yet they held a promise deeper than anything she had heard in a long time. The girl blinked slowly, absorbing the meaning behind them, while a fragile feeling of safety began to replace the cold fear that had followed her through endless hours of hunger and uncertainty. In that gentle moment, beneath the fading sky and the quiet breath of the wind, the lonely road that had nearly broken them all suddenly became the place where a new beginning quietly took its first step. The cowboy gently took the reins and began guiding the horse along the quiet road while the evening sky slowly darkened above them. And the little girl held the saddle tightly while glancing back to make sure her mother was still walking beside the cowboy's steady support. Every step felt uncertain for the weak woman, yet the firm arm holding her kept her from falling. The journey across the open land was slow, but the calm presence of the cowboy created a strange feeling of safety that had not existed before. The wind moved softly through the tall grass as distant lights from the ranch finally appeared on the horizon, glowing like small stars in the growing darkness. The girl noticed them first and leaned forward slightly, her tired eyes filled with quiet curiosity. She had not seen a warm place in what felt like forever. As they reached the wooden gate, the cowboy opened it and led them inside, guiding the horse toward a modest house standing peacefully beneath the wide night sky. A lantern hanging beside the door cast a golden light across the porch, and the warmth from inside could almost be felt before the door even opened. The girl carefully slid down from the saddle with the cowboy's help, her legs shaking slightly after the long day. The mother was guided inside next, moving slowly but with relief written across her face. The cowboy placed another lantern on the table, brightening the small room, then quickly prepared a simple meal and warm water. The smell of food filled the air, and for a moment the girl simply stared at the bowl in front of her as if she feared it might disappear. When she finally took the first careful bite, her eyes softened with quiet amazement. Hunger that had haunted her for days slowly began to fade with every spoonful. The mother sat nearby, holding the warm cup the cowboy had placed in her hands, and tears quietly gathered in her eyes while she watched her daughter eat with growing strength. No grand speeches were spoken, no dramatic promises were made, yet the kindness of that silent moment carried more meaning than any words could express. The girl even let out a small laugh when the cowboy's old ranch dog wandered into the room and wagged its tail beside her chair, hoping for a share of the meal. That soft sound of laughter filled the small house and broke the heavy silence that had followed them for so long. The mother looked around the room, realizing that a stranger who owed them nothing had opened his home without hesitation. The world had turned its back on them during their darkest moment, yet one quiet cowboy had chosen a different path. In that humble ranch house, surrounded by warmth and simple kindness, their exhausted hearts slowly understood that the road which nearly destroyed them had unexpectedly led to the one place where hope had been waiting all along. Morning sunlight slowly spread across the ranch fields, and the place that once lived in silence now carried a different sound. The little girl ran through the grass with laughter that felt bright and free, a sound the lonely land had not heard in many years. The cowboy stood near the fence watching quietly, realizing that the house which once held only shadows now held life and warmth. The mother had regained her strength day by day, and gratitude filled her eyes whenever she looked at the man who had changed their fate on that empty road. What began as a moment of simple kindness had slowly grown into something deeper than any of them expected. The girl no longer feared the world because she finally felt safe. And the cowboy, who once believed he was meant to live alone, discovered that saving two fragile lives had quietly healed his own heart, turning a lonely ranch into a real family.